So I want to start off just kind of giving people a little bit of a background on you. So you were the chief technology officer, an executive vice president of product, an executive vice president of international markets for Gateway. This is back in the day when Gateway, back in the 90s, I forget when they hit this market cap, but I looked up that their market cap got as high as 24 billion
Mhm.
for the company. And so, I mean, this is a major, major, I had a Gateway, back in the college days. so, um, and you were a major executive in this company. So you've done product development at a very high level. And I guess my question for you is starting off there, how with that background, when and how did you come across Bitcoin? And like what was the initial take coming out of this hardcore tech background? What was your initial take when you started hearing about it?
Yeah, well, by the way, thank you for remembering. For the older members of the audience, hopefully you remember well, because we were quite successful, and not to pat myself on the back, and it was obviously a massive team. I was
Yeah.
part of it, but as you said, we had about 25,000 employees at one point. We had 400 retail stores. We had about 10 billion in revenue. We were making about 10 million PCs a year, and that was in. It's almost hard to imagine now when I look back at it what I went through.
Yeah.
It's almost like that was a different person, but it was really a magical time. And it leads a little bit to the question you asked me, which was how I got to Bitcoin. Because I'll be honest that I feel like when I left that industry, which was in 2004, I'd spent about 20 years there. I got a little lost. I got to almost say
Mm,
I was like a little lost, not in some major way, but it's kind of wondering like what's my purpose? Because I had been through this thing that was just so it was so big, like you
it's a
said. Like I
behemoth.
woke up every day with this purpose, like, and we were my background goes all the way back to the mid '80s and my early PC development days, so right at the cusp, and so I didn't have something that exciting, and
Mhm.
and so life was just kind of bland. But anyway, I in 2017 one night I got a phone call. I always give my wife credit for this. It was 9 o'clock at night. My phone rang. It was a Seattle phone number. I did not recognize the phone number, and I wasn't going to answer it, like probably most people don't want to answer, right? And my wife said, "Answer it." I don't want to. She said, "Answer it." So I did. It turned out it was an old Gateway acquaintance. And he said, "Bob, um, I'm starting a company. I've raised a bunch of money. I need 300 Ethereum mining servers." That ended up turning into 800 Ethereum mining servers a little later, as fast as I can. I can't get the NVIDIA chips. I can't get anybody to design something professionally. Can you do that? And I'll make that part of the story short. I didn't know much about cryptocurrency or Bitcoin or any of those things at that time, but I was a computer guy. And I just looked at it as a computer guy and ended up saying yes. I started a company, which we now know as Barefoot Mining, to build those. And ended up being about a $6 million order. So I started a company to fulfill that, which you're
Mm,
pretty lucky, right? To get a $6 million order as your
yeah.
first PO. But I looked at it as a computer guy, and I had contacts along with Keith Thomas, who's the president at Barefoot, along with me. We're both ex Gateway people. Little story now that NVIDIA is what eclipsing Amazon in market cap is. When they were a startup trying to find their first customer, the very first customer of NVIDIA was Gateway. We
Gateway.
were the first ones to put their chip on a motherboard. Um, Keith was the head of desktop engineering working for me, and who works for me now and is part of our team. So we were integral to kind of that little start for NVIDIA at that time.
That would have been huge risk for you guys to incorporate this, NVIDIA chip into the hardware. Like, I love production. I love talking
Yeah,
about, like, going through because there's a lot of risk, especially when you're dealing with hardware, running
yeah.
a new chip like that. Like, walk us through, you know, more for my own,
Yeah.
curiosity. That risk profile that you were looking at putting in this chip, was it done on other you said the Gateway is the very first company to do this. Like,
Yes.
what type of purchase order? How many thousands of units? And, like, how are you guys going through the risk of that?
I can't remember the specifics, but it was probably, given where we were at that time, this would have been, I don't know, 92, 93, something in that order. It was probably an order for 50 to 100,000 graphics chips
Wow.
at the time. Um, we would have always had a plan B. I can't tell you specifically, it's too long. I'm sure we had a plan B, which was, hey, if we were designing for a specific desktop model, right? And
Yeah.
we were at Gateway, for those of you who don't know Gateway well, and you may even, we tried to push the edge. That's, our position in the marketplace was we were a little more consumer oriented than business oriented. And we tried to push the envelope. We were tried to push the value, especially like that you could get, in this case, graphics performance at a certain level at a price that nobody else had seen before. Um, and so I'm sure that's what we were chasing with NVIDIA. They
Mhm,
were
mhm.
they were a startup. They had some great architectural things. They've always, it's amazing, by the way, for 30 years, they have been able to maintain that technical edge. My hat's off to them. But yeah, there's a lot of risk associated in that too. But it's the only way to have been successful. In the early 90s, the PC market was trying to sort itself out. Gateway was at the time probably about $1 billion company, probably 10 to 12 in terms of market share in the world, something on that order. But we hadn't made it yet. We hadn't IPO'd yet. The IPO was still a little bit away. So we had to have a little bit of that gunslinger attitude to chase and try to get to the top of the pile. And as I said, they were grateful for that. And so when we called up, some of you might remember in 2017, obviously we're still in the GPU era, and especially in the non-Bitcoin related coins. I mean, that was heavy GPU stuff. So if you could get access to the chips, you could do really well, at least in fiat terms, mining. And that's what we did. We built this design, got these things to market, and did quite well with it. A little sidelight, just I have a background in economics as well, more of a macro thing. I'm not on par with our buddies like James Lavish or Larry Lepard or Lynn Alden in terms of my macro, but I try to at least be proficient, and I have been, and I got turned on to Austrian economics in the early 2000s, about 2001, 2002, when the dot-com bubble burst. I soured heavily, and so I started looking for something different. The short version of that story is I had done very well. I was part of the Gateway IPO. I had done well, and then I cashed out a lot in the late 90s, only to see a lot of that wealth evaporate in the crash, right? Yeah. And I had put a lot of faith in traditional financial advisors and wealth advisors in that period, and they failed me. So I started looking elsewhere, like what's wrong? How can this be fixed? So I found Austrian thought at that point. As I started to, after getting like this order done and starting to sell this Ethereum equipment, I started to look deeper technically at what Ethereum really was. Because at first, this was just a computer guy building computers. That's what that was. And then I started looking at it. And so first I looked at the technical aspects of Ethereum, and I started to get uneasy. I could see the technical complexity that they were trying to tackle. And if you've ever been involved in big software projects, you realize that they don't work well, right? And they rarely come together. They never meet their timelines. They basically never meet their goals and objectives. And what I saw was this piece of software. That's how I was looking at it, right? With all these tentacles and interdependencies, said this isn't going to work. And then peeling deep into what really is proof of stake. And that led me really to Bitcoin and proof of work. And so I started to appreciate and understand first from a technical perspective, but then seeing the Austrian in me, starting to see the monetary policy and the issuance and like these sorts of things and those sound money principles really coming out in Bitcoin. So we pivoted at that point. Unfortunately, we didn't have access to a chip at the time. Maybe we can talk about that a little bit later. But we didn't have the ability to design our own systems at that time, but we did. So we did the next best thing, which was we signed an agreement with Bitfury, which was a large European maker of Bitcoin mining equipment, and became the U.S. distributor and service center for Bitfury equipment. So that gave us an entree 2018, 2019, 2020 to enter the Bitcoin world. And we migrated from providing systems to providing hosting systems to now largely, I guess you would call it self-mining, although we usually do it through partnerships. So, but we do have a small hosting business and self-mining. But our real desire is to get back all the way to designing our own systems.
So I love this. This is the perfect lead into the next question I have, which is when we're talking about application specific integrated circuits, there's basically one manufacturer in the world right now. Now I know Blockstream is working on a solution. I think they're maybe in the test phase of the ASIC that they're building, the rig that they're building. You are working on, and I don't know how much you can share, and if not much, that's perfectly fine. But I know that you're working on your own ASIC and your own design work, and you're working with some people from your past on designing this. So lay it on us if you're able to, and if not, then be able to push as much as you want.
No, I can tell you a fair amount today. And as I already lead it in, I think that one of the things I want to give a little bit more background. I believe in self-sovereignty. So as a miner, if I have something I call the miner stack, And if you can visualize this, it's the energy toward the miners through the dark days.
Mhm.
I think that was only half of the story, though. And so we're obviously constantly amazed by Satoshi's genius, right? There's too much genius to have been coincidental. And part of that is, well, no, the subsidy was also a subsidy for the users. The subsidy was there to give a period of time in which we could have essentially unlimited access for free to the most secure network in the world that was free, right? And the reason fees were effectively zero was because of that. It was to incent user adoption. I think that's over.
Yeah.
The introductory period is over. This is like we're in early February right now. So probably in gyms all around the world in January, there's a free first month of membership in your fitness club, right? Well, that ends and you start paying in February. Well, that's where we are in Bitcoin. We're through the introductory period. And then there's a lot of ramifications though beyond that too. So as an example, as a miner, when we move from most of our revenue being subsidy to most of it being fees, that means also that our revenue stream moves from something that is fixed to something that is variable.
Variable, yes. So now you're
And
getting into derivatives. Yeah.
right,
Yeah.
right. And so, like you're much more astute and knowledgeable, Preston, than I am in the financial world. But one thing that I'm pretty confident in is that any commodity that's produced, for it to mature and really take off, there's like always a derivatives market,
Mhm.
right? Whether it's an agricultural product or precious metal or whatever, there's a and part of that on one side is that the producers can lock in some certainty about future demand and future price. Like, so if you're growing corn in Iowa and it's May, you can sell some of your October harvest off. You may not sell all of it. You may sell a part of it, right? You sell a part of that future harvest, and then at a fixed price that you can be profitable at. And maybe you sell off 30 or 40% of it, and the rest you ride with the wind. And maybe as time goes by, you sell off more and more. The other side of that is there are companies that need corn to for whatever they make, right? Whether that's a bakery or somebody feeding cattle or whatever. They have the same thing. Like they have this variable cost structure, and if they don't lock in that price of corn, they have a problem. Okay. Well, block space is the same way. Block space in and of itself is a commodity.
Mhm.
Bitcoin mining companies today, in today's world, I think if you said, what is the product of a Bitcoin mining company, you would probably say it's Bitcoin. And it goes back to the subsidy. What we produce primarily is the Bitcoin. We get these little tips or fees that kind of are just a little cherry on top. That flips. Maybe in as soon as 5 years, it flips to where, as I said, we have this variable thing. Well, the variable thing is not really tied to the production of Bitcoin. What it's tied to is the production of block space.
Mhm. Mhm.
So that's a whole different paradigm shift, right? Like that what we're producing is not Bitcoin. We're producing block space. Now, if I, as a mining company, to keep it simple, and we'll put it in today's terms, if I own 1% of the world's hash rate, and I also have control of the block template, meaning I pick what transactions go in the block, then I control 1% of the world's transactions. And those transactions are virtual real estate. And I can sell that. I can sell
You
that
can
into
sell
the future.
you can sell
Future
it
contract.
OTC, you can sell it on the mempool, which is basically like a spot market, right?
Yeah.
But you
Right.
have to be able to control the template.
Yeah. And so I believe that mining companies
Mhm.
will work very hard to moderate some of that. Interestingly, there's a second side of it. If I am BlackRock, if I'm an exchange, I'm a company like that, I might be doing 100 base layer transactions a day, let's say.
Mhm.
Now, right now, is that a meaningful part of my P&L statement? No, it's not today. But in this future world where fees are maybe 30 times higher on average than they are today, or 100 times higher, it becomes a meaningful part of the profitability of my organization.
Very interesting.
So what do I want to do? I want to buy these futures contracts and lock in a future price
Yeah.
so that a miner and then facilitate a relationship. So
Yes.
um, I think this is an important part of the long-term health of the infrastructure. It's probably scary to people. There's even parts of it. I mean, I get a little willies myself it's such a dramatic shift from where we are today.
Yeah.
But it kind of means, yeah, you know what? A lot of the financial institutions and a lot of the big guys are coming in, and when they come in, they are going to drive these sorts of, well, they have these needs, and they're going to drive these kinds of solutions.
The
And it's the
expertise in all of this, though, it exists, right? It's just not pointed at Bitcoin and the whole Bitcoin ecosystem yet. But the
right,
expertise around derivatives and like how to do a lot of these things, it's there in the world. It's just it's so fascinating to me that like as you describe this, it just seems like there's so much uh reinforcing behavior from a technological standpoint that only makes this thing stronger and stronger and stronger in a naturally occurring way, almost like as you would see nature unfold when you see such complexity just manifest itself on top of itself. It,
yeah,
it, it's it's strange. It's fascinating. It's
yeah,
it's indescribable in a
it is,
really strange, weird way.
yeah. Yeah, it's why not to get too deep philosophically or whatever, but, I think, a lot of times people in the sciences, and I would kind of consider myself on the periphery of that, they go through these phases kind of from a religious standpoint. I'm not here to profess any specific religion, but you kind of go through a period where often people in the maths and the sciences, they lose their faith, and then it kind of comes back later in life, the deeper they
Mhm.
get, like, you start studying, and just kind of as a hobby, I like to study the universe and, like, physics and things like that. And that's kind of my path is like, well, I should became more spiritual, more belief in a higher power the more that I saw this stuff.
Mhm.
And I'll go back to, I believe Bitcoin is divinely inspired. We should not worship it. Please don't take it that way. But
Yeah.
like
It's miraculous.
it is.
Yeah.
It is fantastic. And I'm sitting here, I told you the start of my story in 2017, deep, deep, deep in the rabbit hole. And still learning these things, still having these revelations. Hopefully doing something to make it better. I say for me and my company, I try to live the ethos. I try to do what's best for Bitcoin in the belief that ultimately it will be the best thing for me and my family.
Yeah.
And, and that's what, like, on this derivative product, I should say too, I am actively working with a company, ironically called Block Spaces out of Tampa, to develop a product to do that. And
Mhm.
I'm sure others will look in similar. I mean, there are already derivatives in, like, obviously Bitcoin and hash price and things like that. But the difference with this one, so I think it ultimately will become the most important, is that the need exists on both sides.
Yeah.
So, like, hash power derivatives or hash price derivatives, excuse me, there's really not a somebody on the other side of it. The other side of it is kind of speculators. So the miners need it, right? There's a need for the miner to say, well, I want to protect my investment. I want to protect my output. But there's not somebody on the other side who had kind of the same dependency. But in the case of block space, there is both a producer and a consumer. And
Yeah.
so I believe ultimately that's what drives this to become the single most important derivative product in
Wow.
our space.
Absolutely fascinating. Bob, I could literally talk to you all day. This was exactly what I knew this conversation was gonna be. I'm just learning a ton. Every time I get around you, I personally get inspired from just your background, the expertise that you bring, and just how thoughtful you are from a very first principles standpoint. Can't thank you enough for making time to come on. You mentioned a couple things that we'll have in the show notes of the episode. Is there anything else that you want to point people towards?